The Bride is a spooky story about a girl who meets a man she wants to marry. In a small town there lived a young woman of incredible beauty. She was endowed with such a perfect face and such a pure soul that every man who met her instantly fell in love. However, she did not seem to be interested in any of the men who lived in her town. One day, while walking down the street, she happened to bump into a young man who had come to visit the town on holiday. He was quite a handsome young man, and when he invited her for a drink, the girl happily accepted. They spoke for hours, and at the end of their date, it was clear that the young woman was falling for his charms. Over the next few days, they went out together every night. She was quickly falling in love with the young man because he always acted like a perfect gentleman. He seemed to return her affection. Time passed and the couple decided to get married. The girl was ecstatic and felt like she was the luckiest girl in the world. However, the young man did not seem to feel the same way. He kept asking the girl if he could borrow some money. He told her that he was expecting a big cash lodgment in his bank account and he would pay her back when it arrived. The young woman willingly gave him all her life savings, trusting that it was only a temporary loan. When their wedding day arrived, the girl looked immaculate in her long, flowing white dress. Her face glowed with happiness and she lit up the room. Her father bought her an expensive wedding ring and engraved her name in the band. Eager to tie the knot, she arrived at the church early that morning. Everyone who was of any importance in the small town was there to celebrate her wedding. Everyone, that is, except the groom. After waiting 10 or 15 minutes, she was still hopeful that he would show up sooner or later. Unfortunately, when several hours passed and he still hadn't arrived, the wedding guests began to leave. The poor girl was humiliated and burst into tears. Nobody could console her. She just kept asking why her fiancé had chosen not to come to the wedding. Her parents took her home and tried to calm her down. They put her to bed and stayed by her bedside to comfort her, but it was no use. She soon fell into a deep depression and nothing could bring her out of it. She simply could not come to terms with having lost the love of her life. After her parents went to bed, the bride got up and stood in front of a mirror, staring at herself. In a fit of madness, she took a knife and ripped her beautiful wedding dress to shreds. Then, driven mad with anger and despair, the poor soul took a knife and sliced her wrists open. As she lay on the floor, her life ebbing away, she clutched a crucifix and swore that she would have her revenge on the man who had ruined her life. When her parents found her the next morning, they were devastated. Her funeral was held a few days later and she was buried in the shredded remains of her wedding dress. Before they lowered her into the ground, her tearful father placed a ring on her finger. The ring that was engraved with her name. The ring that was to have been her wedding band. The news of her death was made known throughout the community. The people began to gossip and soon there was much talk about the young man who had abandoned the poor girl at the altar. He had been seen, the day after the wedding, in the company of another woman. They had been spotted many times hanging out in bars together, drinking, laughing and joking and spending money freely. They were acting as if nothing had happened. A few nights later, the young man was found lying outside the church. He had been stabbed to death. Everyone wondered who had murdered him. Many people were of the opinion that a thief had seen him spending all that money and taken the opportunity to rob him. However, when the police examined his body, they found a ring on his finger. A ring engraved with the name of the girl he had abandoned at the altar. The White Bear is a creepy story about a boy who has a teddy bear that he loves dearly. Things begin to go wrong when a bully at school starts vandalizing the bear. I was 8 years old when I got the white bear for Christmas. I can still remember opening the present and seeing the teddy bear lying inside. I couldn't have been happier. I named him Chester and I would never go anywhere without him. We were inseparable. I would even take him to school with me. Whenever I brought Chester to school, everyone in my class would point at me and make fun of me. They made rude comments about my teddy bear and called me names. I didn't pay any attention to their cruel remarks. One day, during art class, I was painting a picture. Chester was sitting on the table beside me. Suddenly, Jeremy Valentine, the class bully, came over and grabbed my white bear. Before I could snatch Chester back, Jeremy took a pair of scissors and snipped Chester's head off. When the teacher saw this, she grabbed Jeremy by the arm and took him to the principal's office. I picked up Chester's body and his severed head and held them to my chest, crying like a baby. When I got home, I showed my mom what had happened to my beloved Teddy. She said she would sew him back together the next day. That night, I was lying in bed when, all of a sudden, I felt something jump onto my chest. When I opened my eyes, I saw Chester lying on my chest. His head was back on, and he looked as good as new. I thought my mom must have sewed him back together and put him into bed with me as a surprise. I hugged Chester and held him close to me as I fell into a peaceful sleep. The next morning, when I woke up, I felt a soreness in my arms. When I looked down, I saw a lot of tiny bite marks on my arms. Then, I glanced at Chester and noticed that he had some red stuff on his mouth. I knew that I couldn't tell my mom, since she would never believe me, so I just put on a sweater to hide the marks, stuffed Chester in my backpack and hurried to get ready for school. When I got to my classroom, I took Chester out of my bag and put him on my desk as usual. During class, I got up to go sharpen my pencil. When I got back, I saw that one of Chester's button eyes had been torn off. I looked at Jeremy, who sat on the other side of the classroom, and saw him grinning at me. I knew he was the culprit, but I had no proof. When I got home, I told Mom about the incident and she said she would fix the white bear's eye. She also told me she was going to call Jeremy's parents and have a word with them about their son's bad behavior. That night, I was getting ready for bed when I heard someone say, "PSSST." I was shocked and turned around in fright. There was nobody there. All I saw was Chester sitting on my bed. I thought I had left him downstairs. I also noticed that he had his eye back. Then, his mouth opened and spoke to me. "Hey, Leo. I need to tell you something," he growled. I stared at him in horror. I thought I was going insane. "Jeremy's parents won't punish him harshly enough for what he has done," said Chester. "We need to give him the punishment he rightfully deserves. I already have a plan, but I need your help. Will you help me, Leo?" Reluctantly, I agreed and Chester started explaining his plan. When I heard it, I was shocked. But I loved Chester so much, I decided to go along with his evil plan. After my mom went to sleep, Chester stole a knife from the kitchen and we headed for Jeremy's house. Chester led the way. When we got there, we snuck in through the back door and tiptoed upstairs to Jeremy's bedroom. Inside, we found Jeremy was sound asleep in his bed. As I lingered there in the darkness, looking down at him, I started having second thoughts about what I was doing, but I couldn't back out. Chester wouldn't allow it. I stood in the doorway, trembling as I watched Chester take out the knife. The white bear walked calmly over to Jeremy's bed and in one swift motion, slit the boy's throat. He didn't even have a chance to scream. I covered my eyes, unable to look at the horrible sight. After a while, I peeked out through my fingers and saw that Chester was sawing Jeremy's head off. Then, he took the knife and poked out his right eye. After that, Chester started chuckling like a maniac. He held up Jeremy's severed head triumphantly. I started crying. "Don't be scared, Leo," he growled. "I did this because you're my bestest friend. I love you." "I love you too, Chester," I whispered. After that, Chester opened the window and told me to climb out. "Be careful," he said. "Don't leave any fingerprints." We snuck out of the house and Chester left Jeremy's head in the driveway for his parents to find. We went home and got into bed. Chester tucked me in and sat beside me until I fell asleep. The next morning, as my mother was preparing breakfast, I saw a news report on TV about Jeremy's murder. As I listened to the gruesome details, I glanced over at Chester. There was an evil grin on his face. I felt sick to my stomach and couldn't eat a thing. I didn't want to take Chester to school with me, but when my mom's back was turned, he hopped into my backpack. I didn't have a choice. I had to ditch him. I headed towards the bus stop, and on the way, I spotted a garbage can. As quick as I could, I tossed the backpack into the trash, slammed down the lid, and ran away. That evening, when I came home from school, I saw that the trash collectors had taken away the garbage. Chester had been taken with it. I thought I had gotten rid of Chester for good. Years later, I left school and went to college. There, I met the love of my life, Donna Hartman, and after graduation we got married and moved in together. One night, I was sitting in the living room, reading a book while Donna was cooking dinner. Suddenly, I heard a blood-curdling scream coming from the kitchen. I jumped out of my chair and rushed out to see what was wrong. As soon as I entered the kitchen, I screamed in horror. Donna's body was lying on the floor in a pool of blood. Her severed head was sitting in the frying pan and her right eye had been poked out. Then, I saw Chester standing on the kitchen table, a bloody knife clutched tightly in his furry hand. "You shouldn't have crossed me, Leo," he growled. "Now you've made me angry, and you know how a white bear acts when he's angry." Before I had a chance to react, Chester jumped at me and tried to stab me in the face. I managed to dodge him and he stabbed the kitchen cabinet instead. The knife got stuck in the wood and Chester began struggling desperately to remove it. Quickly, I opened a drawer and grabbed the first thing I could find, a saucepan. I swung the metal saucepan as hard as I could and struck Chester over the head. For a moment, he was stunned. Then, he leaped on top of me and his furry paws grabbed for my throat. He began choking me, and I struggled to push him off. I pulled the knife out of the kitchen cabinet and began stabbing him, but it was no use. The blade just went through his stuffing. It didn't hurt him at all. Then, Chester picked up a cheese grater and tried to grate my face off. I dropped the knife. My hands searched desperately for something I could use as a weapon. I grabbed a soup ladle and began beating him ferociously over the head with it. Then, I picked up a dinner plate and broke it over his head. He released me from his grip and I fled out the front door and ran to the safety of a neighbor's house. I called the police and told them an intruder had broken into my house and murdered my wife. A few minutes later, several police cars came speeding down the street and screeched to a halt outside my driveway. The officers emerged from their cars with their guns drawn and entered my house. They searched it from top to bottom, but found no sign of an intruder. After securing the scene, they began questioning me and that's when everything started to go wrong. I tried to explain what had happened, but I was so distraught that all that came out was gibberish. They took me to the hospital and put me under armed guard. When I managed to calm down, I tried to tell them that my childhood teddy bear had returned, seeking revenge, and had decapitated my wife, but they just didn't believe a word I said. Chester was long gone and my fingerprints were all over the murder weapon. I was arrested and charged with the murder of my wife. At the trial, I tried to mount a defense, but that's hard to do when you're trying to convince a jury that the real killer is a teddy bear. They found me guilty of murder in the first degree and sentenced me to life in prison without the possibility of parole. I will never be set free, and the only comfort I have is that I'm finally safe from that evil white bear. The Magic Castle is a scary story about a woman who finds a message in the woods warning her not to go to an old, abandoned castle. There was a woman who lived in a remote village in the countryside. Every evening, she took her dog for a walk in the forest. One evening, they strayed off the path and came to an area that was completely unfamiliar to her. From a distance, she saw the old ruins of a stone wall and there was something green on it. As she walked closer to the wall, she was able to make out message, written in a ghastly green layer of glowing slime. It read, "Do not go the magic castle at midnight." She had heard rumors about a magic castle in the forest. The villagers told scary stories about the castle and claimed that it was haunted. The woman was very curious and wondered what could be in the castle. Why would someone write a message, warning people not to go there? Her curiosity got the better of her and she decided to visit the castle that very night. Shortly before midnight, the woman arrived at a clearing in the woods. In front of her stood the magic castle. It looked old, uninhabited, and dilapidated. Even from the outside, it smelled of damp, mold, and rotting wood. On the door, there was another message in green slimy letters. It read, "Do not enter." She reached out and touched the front door. It opened with a loud and ominous creak. The woman walked into the hallway. On the floor, she saw a painting of a gruesome red skull. Beside it, in slimy green letters, was the message, "Do not go one step further." The woman was overcome by curiosity and paid no attention to the warning. She just kept right on walking until she came to a staircase that led up to the next level. On the bottom step, there was another warning sign, written in the same green, slimy letters. It read, "Do not go up these stairs." Naturally, the woman paid no heed to the warning and started walking up the stairs. The steps were made of wood and they creaked terribly at every footfall. When she reached the top, the woman found herself in front of a large oak door. There was yet another warning on it, written in the same green slime. It read, "Do not open this door." And what did the woman do? She opened the door. Very slowly and gently, she pushed the door and it creaked open, inch by inch. Then, she stood in a dark room. She couldn't see anything. As her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she saw a large, oblong box in the middle of the room. It glowed with a greenish hue. Once again, she saw a warning in green slime. It read, "Do not open this coffin." The woman wondered what could be in the coffin. Slowly, she pushed the heavy lid of the coffin to the side. Filled with excitement and dread, she looked inside and saw many colorful Smarties. The dead body is a scary about a young boy who is home alone when he starts getting some strange phone calls asking him if there is a corpse in the apartment. There was a young boy. One evening, his parents went out and left him home alone. They told him to get himself ready and go to bed no later than 10 p.m. They warned him they would return after midnight and if he was still up, there would be hell to pay. The boy started playing games on the computer and lost track of time. He looked at the clock and realized it was already 11:05 p.m. He was about to go to the bathroom to brush his teeth when the phone rang. Thinking it was his parents checking up on him, the boy let it ring for a while. Then, he picked up the phone, pretended to yawn loudly and said, "Hello?" "Hello," replied an unfamiliar male voice on the other end. "Is there a dead body in your apartment?" I don't think so," replied the boy, more than a little surprised. "Can you check, please?" asked the voice. "We will call back in 5 minutes." The caller hung up. The boy just stood there astonished. The phone call disturbed him. Why would anyone think there was a corpse in his apartment? What kind of a question was that? What scared him the most was the mysterious caller's use of the word "we." He picked up the phone again and tried to call him mom and dad on their cell phones. He kept calling them, but they didn't answer. They had probably switched their phones off, he thought. As soon as he hung up, the phone rang again and he immediately answered it. "Well, is there a dead body?" asked the voice. I haven't searched yet," the boy replied. "Well, what are you waiting for?" demanded the voice. "You think the corpse will find itself? We will call back in 5 minutes." The boy went around the entire apartment, looking here and there, but there was no corpse. The phone rang again. "Well? Did you find it?" "No." "Nope. Nowhere." "And you searched the whole apartment?" the voice asked. "Yes." "Every room," said the boy. "And in the cupboards? Under the beds? Air? No." "Well, have a look," the voice growled. "What's the matter with you? Have you never played hide and seek? We will call back in 5 minutes." The boy walked around the apartment. He looked in all the closets, under all the beds. He even checked the balcony. There was no corpse. The phone rang again. Well, did you find it? No. There's no dead body here. Okay, perhaps we have the wrong apartment. The voice laughed and hung up the phone. The boy was confused by the phone calls, but he knew his parents would be home soon. He didn't want to get in trouble, so he quickly got undressed and hopped into bed. Just as he was about to fall asleep, he thought he heard the front door of the apartment quietly open and close. Then, soft footsteps came down the hallway. Sometime after midnight, the boy's parents came home. When they walked into the apartment and turned on the lights, they were confronted by a horrible sight. Their son was hanging lifeless from the ceiling. A rope was tied around his neck and his eyes were wide open, frozen in a look of terror. His mother screamed. Just then, the phone rang. His father answered it. "Hello," said an unfamiliar voice. "Is there a dead body in your apartment?" The treehouse. It was summertime and 3 boys named Johnny, Pete, and Lucas were hanging out in their treehouse. All of a sudden, they heard a knock on the door, and when Pete opened it, there was a little girl standing outside. She introduced herself as Martha and asked if she could come in. Seeing no reason to deny access, the boys agreed and she eagerly stepped inside. "I like your treehouse," she marveled. Lucas noticed her eyes were reddish-brown, too red to be maroon. She didn't have skin pale enough to be albino, and her eyes had a wicked gleam in them. The next day, Martha came back. She delicately inspected every object like it was pure gold. When she left for dinner, Lucas locked the door behind her, closed the windows and pulled down the shades. "Guys, I don't think we should let Martha back in," he said. "Why not?" Pete asked. "She seems nice enough." "I don't know," said Lucas. "All I know is, I've got a funny feeling about her." His eyes darted to the window. He gently pulled the shade over to the side, and was relieved to see Martha walking away in the distance. She had gone too far already to have heard the conversation. The next day, Martha tried to invite herself in. The door was locked with an additional bar in front of it. Lucas had gone paranoid. "Sorry, Martha," Pete said. "We're doing homework for a test tomorrow." Martha, being only 6 or so, glared at the boys angrily. "But I want to play," she snapped. Pete's eyes narrowed. "We're studying," he growled. "Now go away." Truth be told, they weren't studying. They were playing video games with a cheap portable TV. "No," Martha huffed and she sat down on the edge of the treehouse. There was a rope ladder dangling at her feet that could be rolled up whenever it wasn't needed. Pete was getting angrier. "We won't let you come back ever if you don't leave now," he shouted. "I hate you," screamed Martha. She was becoming something of a brat by now. "You hate me, I hate you," shouted Pete, and with that, he kicked Martha off the edge of the treehouse. It was a long way down. Lucas and Johnny were horrified. A sickening crack made the boys cringe. The boys peered over the edge and saw Martha's body lying on the ground below. Her head was split open and her arms and legs were bent at weird angles. Blood was seeping out all over her white dress. The boys exchanged nervous glances. "What have you done?" whispered Lucas. "You killed her." "Calm down," said Johnny. He obviously didn't mean to do it. "At least it's dark," Pete said. "We can just say she slipped and fell." Yeah, Johnny replied. "She slipped and fell. That's what happened." Lucas was shaking. His eyes were wide with fear. The other boys kept working on him until he agreed to keep it a secret. Then, they all ran home and tried to pretend that nothing had happened. That night, as he lay in bed, Pete couldn't sleep. All he could think about was the twisted expression he had seen on Martha's face when she had fallen. Heck, even her dark red eyes had rolled back into her head. To add to the situation, he was the one who killed her. Pete tossed and turned, but he eventually managed to fall asleep. Meanwhile, Johnny was lying in his bed, trembling with fear. He was addicted to horror stories and most things didn't frighten him, but he was unable to get the sight of the dead little girl out of his mind. It left him terrified. Lucas wasn't doing much better. He lay awake, his eyes scanning the darkness, flinching at every little sound. Just then, the clock struck midnight. Was it just his imagination, or did he hear a voice? Yes, he did. It was the voice of a little girl, singing an eerie tune. I hate you, you hate me. Meanwhile, Johnny and Pete could hear it too. I hate you, you hate me, I hate you, you hate me. Every minute, the voice seemed to get closer. You hate me, I hate you, you killed me, I'll kill you. The last thing the boys ever saw was Martha's bloody, crippled body standing over them. The next day, the news stations reported a very strange story. 3 young boys had jumped out of their bedroom windows during the night and fallen to their death. No one knew it, but it was Martha, coming back for revenge.